Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Yes, it's official now. Lex Luger is in the WWE, is going into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2025. It's been a big day for former WCW stars, and I say he's WCW because he's linked more to WCW than the WWE, to be honest with you. He had more success there in WCW. And today on his YouTube channel, he's been doing lately workouts with DDP yoga, much like other wrestlers, Scott Hall, Buff Bagwell, Jake the Snake Roberts, Vader for a while, Butterbean. Not just wrestlers, but other celebrities. He's been working with them on exercises, and they did a video where they're doing one of their exercise sessions, and Cody Rhodes comes in and announces to Lex he's going into the WWE Hall of Fame. Happy for Lex. You know, I talk about this a lot. Even though I started watching wrestling in 1990. First pay-per-view I watched was WrestleMania 6. The first time I really got invested in wrestling was in 1993, and it was Lex Luger's Angle. It was the Angle, July the 4th, 1993, on the USS Intrepid. Lex Luger body slammed Yokozuna. And for the whole summer, he went around the whole country basically campaigning to be the number one contender for the WWF Championship. And in the Palace of Auburn Hills, Michigan, at SummerSlam 93, he defeated Yokozuna by countout. Yeah. It was weird. He won the match, but he did not win the title after all that hype. And he celebrated like he won, because the year before, he had gotten into a motorcycle accident. He had to have a metal rod put in his forearm, so he began to use that as his finisher when he first came into WWE in the beginning of 1993 as the Narcissist. The Narcissist Lex Luger, a heel wrestler. Kind of managed, I guess you would say, or advised by Bobby the Brain Heenan. The purpose of him was, of course, Bobby Heenan, since Survivor Series 92, had been feuding with Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect turned face on Bobby Heenan and teamed up with the Macho Man. So Mr. Perfect was no longer part of that trio of Mr. Perfect, Ric Flair, and Bobby Heenan anymore. So Ric Flair, of course, kicked out of the company, had the match on Raw. Mr. Perfect, loser leaves town, goes back to WCW. But Luger, who had previously been with World Bodybuilding Federation, because when he left WCW, he lost the title to Sting in Super Brawl 2. And then he left WCW. Funny because they wanted to build, after Ric Flair left WCW in 1991, they wanted to build the company around Lex Luger as the new Ric Flair. Jim Herd did. But then Lex Luger ends up leaving. So he has a non-compete clause with WCW, where if he goes to another company, he cannot compete there. Right? But he finds ways around it because Vince McMahon is starting a bodybuilding federation, and he signs as a bodybuilder and not as a wrestler. So when they first introduce him, it's at WrestleMania 8. It's right after the match with Bret Hart and Roddy Piper. And he does the promo like he drinks a glass of milk and shit. It's really weird. So I never watched WBF, needless to say. Was not really a fan of the bodybuilding, but he came in to WWE as a narcissist, and it was a pretty good gimmick. And because of the loaded form, he was knocking people out. He wasn't using the torture rack at first. So they're doing the USS Intrepid thing where Yokozuna is the champion. He's been the champion since June of 1993. Beat Hulk Hogan. He chased Hulk Hogan out of the WWF. Uh, so now justice needs to be served in typical wrestling fashion. When a babyface is vanquished like that, just like Hogan. Hogan came in '84 and got revenge against against the Iron Sheik for what he did to Backlund. Well, this time Luger was going to do it with Hogan. He comes, every Savage beats everybody, beats all the other wrestlers, and NFL football players, even Macho Man, crush everybody. And there's nobody left. So a helicopter appears, and everybody's chanting Hogan, Hogan, Hogan. I heard it was like 100 degrees or whatever, like that day for people that I know that went. Right? It was a really hot day. Of course, July 4th, Independence Day. Right? So everybody's chanting Hogan, Hogan. He comes down, and it's Luger. Luger never officially turned face on TV. This was his face turn. They said anybody can do it, so it was kind of cool because, like, yeah, he's still a heel, but he's narcissist, but he cares about America, and he doesn't want America to be insulted by this Japanese foreigner, right? So, pretty cool. So Heenan goes down to try to stop him. He pushes Heenan to the side. That's the end of his relationship with Heenan, and he body slams Yokozuna, and then he goes on the bus for a whole month. And all the baby faces are wearing red, white, and blue wristbands in support of him. It's a take on Bill Clinton's campaign in the '92 elections. That's where you got it from. And they produced this video, I'll Be Your Hero. It sounds like kind of like Michael Bolton singing or whatever. I don't know if it is him, but it's this really funny video where like Luger's going around. But then like your mythology is shattered as a kid because you're thinking, oh, Luger loves this. But then Bruce Pritchard did his podcast on SummerSlam '93, and he was like, Luger hated the bus, the bus thing. He didn't even want to stay in all the buses. Like he was like a really hard, miserable babyface. But they were trying hard. They were trying to make him the next Hogan. And I guess Vince just got cold feet. He pulled the Triple H did the same thing with Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania 39, where you think, okay, this is perfect for Cody to win. He's got to defeat Roman Reigns, and he doesn't. You know what I mean? And that's how this kind of was. But Luger didn't lose. He just won by countout. You know what I mean? But here's the funny part. Jim Cornette had just come in. See my Yoda cup? Lisa gave me this Yoda cup. It says J on it. It's Yoda J. But anyway, they're pushing Luger as the new Hogan. But the funny part, Jim Cornette had just come in that summer. And of course, Jim Cornette from WCW too. Yeah, he had history with Luger, just like he had history with the Steiners. So Bobby Heenan does the interview with him. He mentions Luger and he mentions the Steiners. Both old ex-WCW guys coming in from WCW and WWE now. So he's the American interpreter of Yokozuna because Mr. Fuji was never good at promos. Like Demolition, when he was the manager of Demolition, they cut their own promos, and Orient Express, they didn't need promos. So like Yokozuna can speak perfect English, but his gimmick is that he can't. So he needs a plumber to cut his promos. So they're doing business with Smoky Mountain, and Jim Cornette's in charge of Smoky Mountain. So they might as well bring Jim Cornette in as Yoko's second manager. So he makes a stipulation that Luger can't wrestle for a rematch. You can't You can't ask for a rematch, even if he loses. You know what I mean? So, but he didn't lose. He just didn't win the championship. So, but still, they make him fight for it, and he fights a qualifying match, and he enters the Royal Rumble 1994. But before that, another foreign heel, like, it's funny because after SummerSlam, when he has the big party, that Ludwig Borga made his debut that night in a match against Marty Jannetty. And after the show, Ludwig Borga goes into the locker room and he's like, uh, yeah, you didn't win the championship. You're just like Americans. You're not good enough. So they set up the Foreign Fanatics versus the All Americans as Survivor Series, and Luger is the sole survivor. And the Santa Claus comes out. This was the last pay-per-view in the Boston Garden. Last pay-per-view in the Boston Garden. And I think they were going to set up something with Ludwig Borga and Luger, because Ludwig Borga was using the torture rack as well. But it never comes to fruition. Borga gets injured, and he's out of the WWF within months. He sucked anyway. You know? Like 2 years almost building up to Tonka, and um, he doesn't. He doesn't. It doesn't pay off. He ends Tatanka streak, kicking him out of the Survivor Series match, and he injures Tatanka, and it's like, okay, he's supposed to wrestle him in a rematch at the Royal Rumble, but nothing ever comes to that because Luger doesn't make it. Borga doesn't make it to the Royal Rumble. Luger, on the other hand, does make it to the Royal Rumble, and like I said in the 1994 year in review, I thought Luger was going to win. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, this makes perfect sense to me. I hadn't been watching wrestling all that long, like a couple of years by then, but I was able to figure it out. I'm like, okay, yeah, they're going to do Lex Luger versus Yokozuna in a rematch. And that was initially the plan until they did this one segment where he and Bret Hart come out and fans are cheering the hell out of Bret Hart and they're numb to Luger. So Vince decides to pivot and then make them co-winners, and they do a coin toss where Luger, if he wins, he got to face Crush earlier in the night because Crush is newly healed. And then if he loses, he got to face Crush, and if Bret Hart loses, he got to face his brother. So obviously, we know history. Bret Hart lost the coin toss, and he had to face Owen Hart. Crush and Luger wrestled each other in the WrestleMania Revenge Tour. So WrestleMania 10, I'm there live. I'm still a Lex Luger guy. I still want Luger to win the championship, but he doesn't. Once again, he gets fucked. You know, like that was the story of his life. He was almost there. Later on, I found out the same thing happened to him in WCW. When I started to go back and rent videotapes out the video store, and I would watch old W's because I was so into Luger, man. In 93, early part of 94, Luger was my guy. You know what I mean? And uh, I got the toy, the action figure, his action figure from when he was in WCW. So then I became interested in him in WCW, which I had never seen. So I'm watching the videotape of the Great American Bash 1988. And here he almost beats Ric Flair, but he doesn't. Then it's a ref stoppage, right? And then the same thing, like a similar thing at Survivor, at Starrcade. It's like Luger almost got to the dance each and every time, but never really got there. So, like, after WrestleMania 10, he kind of drops off. And like, I never liked Bret Hart. Like, honestly, I'll tell you guys the truth. Like, Bret Hart was never my guy. Luger was my guy. And then after Luger falls off the scene and he doesn't win the championship and he goes on to do other things, like he had a match with the Intercontinental Championship on Raw against Diesel one time. He didn't win. And then he goes to team with British Bulldog in '95 as the Allied Powers, and that was a pretty cool team. And I thought that team was going places. I honestly thought like they were doing a lot of tag matches with Owen Hart and Yokozuna, which was a newly formed team, and then the Smoking Guns and Bob Sparkplug Holly and the 1-2-3 Kid and Bam Bam and Tatanka after Tatanka turned heel. Oh, that's another thing with Luger. Okay. In the 1994 year in review video, I skipped this part, and I really wanted to talk about it. And every time I look back at that video, it gets me mad because I forgot to talk about it because I was so into the Owen Hart Bret talk and the Undertaker versus Undertaker talk. But another big match for that show was Lex Luger's angle. And I love this angle because just like the Undertaker versus Undertaker angle, it showed how much of a mark I really was as a kid. At 9 years old, going on 10, right? I was gonna turn 10 because my birthday is in August. I mean, I was 8 gonna turn 9. Sorry, 94. Yeah, 8 gonna turn 9. So I'm 8 gonna turn 9, and I was a huge mark, man. I believed everything at that time, and peak of my fandom, eight and a half gonna be 9, right? Like gonna be 9, like. Not even a half, going to be 9 that month, August. So I'm believing that The Undertaker is now allies with Ted DiBiase. I'm believing, and another thing is, I'm believing that Lex Luger sold out because Tatanka is going around telling people that Lex sold out. Right? And not only that, like he would go into rooms and he would see Luger talking with Ted DiBiase. When Ted DiBiase and Lex Luger were on the Heartbreak Hotel, Shawn Michaels' segment, they were using on a first name basis. So I'm like, yeah, Luger's gonna turn and he's gonna sell out. It's very similar to the John Cena, Cody Rhodes Rock storyline, like on a less grander scale because it didn't involve a title or anything, but like people are made to believe that this person's going to sell out, but it's really another person that's going to sell out, right? And my dad was telling me, he's like, no, he'd been watching wrestling since longer. Of course, he introduced me to it, right? He's telling me, no, Luger's not going to sell out. Tatanka's going to sell out. And I'm like, how is Tatanka going to sell out when Tatanka is the one telling us that Luger's selling out? How's that possible? So we get to SummerSlam, and they have the match, and it's very similar. Like I said, here's Ted DiBiase approaching Luger, and then what does Tatanka do? He attacks Luger, and I'm like, and then it was revealed that it was my dad was right all along. Tatanka sold out. And like that, like it was just crazy, that angle, man. And like once the Tonka turned heel, that was the end of him. He was like a deflated balloon. Like I said with Ahmed Johnson when he turned heel. You know what I mean? And it was kind of over for Luger too. He'd start teaming with British Bulldog, like I said, in '95. And I'm thinking he's going to win the tag team titles because, again, it's Tatanka, Bam Bam Bigelow. It's Smoking Guns, Owen and Yoko. Kind of the head shrinkers are kind of on their way out. The Steiners aren't there anymore. The tag division is very different than what it was from a couple of years ago. So it's very weak. So they have a chance. And it was a really cool theme music, Rule Britannia with Luger's American theme music, a patriotic British guy and a patriotic American guy, like a British and American version of each other. And then at SummerSlam 1995, for some strange reason, at the end of the Mabel Diesel match, Mo runs in to help Mabel, of course, and Lex Luger runs in to help Diesel. And I'm like, what does Lex Luger have to do with Diesel? He wasn't even on the show. So that, of course, sets up a tag match on Raw the next Monday with not Lex Luger, but with British Bulldog and Diesel. And British Bulldog turns heel and joins Jim Cornette, and he turns on Diesel. But I always wondered where that angle was going to go. Like, what were they going to do with Luger and Diesel? Were they going to be a team? Were they going to team up somehow and get together? They never really say. But like I said, Luger was my guy because I didn't like Bret Hart. I felt like once Bret Hart won the championship at WrestleMania 10, even though I was there live in attendance, I felt that Luger should have won. So I turned against Bret and I started rooting for Owen. And I started rooting for Bob Backlund. And Owen and Bob Backlund became my two favorites. As you know, I became a heel fan for a while against Bret because I didn't like Bret. You know what I mean? I always view Bret as a very selfish person, his wrestling character, because I saw it through Owen's eyes. But yeah, all Bret had to do was tag him, and they would have won the tag team championship against the Quebec because they were Rumble '94. You know what I mean? So that's how I looked at it. But surprise, surprise, Lex Luger leaves WWE and goes to WCW, the first episode of Nitro, the end of the Hulk Hogan Big Bubba match at the Mall of America in Minnesota, without anybody knowing. In the dead of night, as it were, he shows up at WCW, and he's the first jump over. He's the first guy that was an active wrestler from WWE to jump to WCW, an active wrestler, because like, okay, Hulk Hogan jumped, and he wasn't really an active wrestler like that anymore. He ceased being a really active wrestler in WWE in '92, in my opinion. And the same thing with Macho Man. Macho Man had the match with Crush at WrestleMania 10. Before that, and like when he lost the title to Ric Flair the second time, he ceased being an active wrestler, like on a consistent basis. So those guys, when they jumped to WCW, they were kind of retired, right? Semi-retired, but not Luger. Luger was just in an angle with Diesel. Like it went nowhere, but we don't know where it would have went, and he stayed. And he told Vince he was staying, but and Vince was kind of always mad at that. So like after WCW, he didn't want to sign Luger back, even though Luger was one of the guys that Vince mentioned in the simulcast promo. He asked the fan about a number of WCW wrestlers, and Luger was one of them. So he comes to WCW, and he got that relationship with Sting. He shows up twice. Shows up at the end of the Big Bubba versus Hulk Hogan match, and at the beginning of the Ric Flair and Sting match. Now, this is very interesting, Ric Flair and Sting, because Lex Luger had history with both these guys. Keep in mind that when they brought Luger into the NWA in 1987, he was supposed to be Jim Crockett Promotions' version of Hulk Hogan. They brought him in from Florida, championship wrestling from Florida. He had the connection with Dusty Rhodes. That's what makes it very significant, is that he had that connection with Dusty Rhodes. He started off in Florida. He was trained by Hiro Matsuda, the same person who trained Hulk Hogan, the same person who trained Ron Simmons. He was trained by that guy, Japanese wrestler that was based out of Florida. And Dusty helped bring him into Jim Crockett in '87 to make him their version of Hogan. But they brought him in as a heel, as a member of the Four Horsemen. Ole Anderson gets kicked out of the Four Horsemen in late '86, I think. Late '86-ish. Ole's out of the Horsemen, and they bring Luger in. But it's all to set up Luger's turn. And when Luger turns babyface, he feuds with Flair. Like all throughout 1988, they're feuding, Luger and Flair. And of course, with Sting, he had a huge history. He tells a story that he didn't really like Sting at first because Sting was kind of conceited when they first met because Luger was already settled in. Sting comes in the latter part of '87 as part of the buyout. Remember, Jim Crockett Promotions buys out Bill Watts' promotion, which was the UWF. Yeah, David, he is. Gets kicked out of Bill Watts' promotion. I mean, there's a buyout. Bill Watts buys out. Jim Crockett buys out Bill Watts, and Sting comes over with him. So Sting and Luger don't like each other that much at first. Both musclehead guys, but WCW teams them together at the first Super Brawl 1 against the Steiner brothers. And this was very unique because it was two babyface tag teams wrestling each other. But then Luger turns heel. Luger turns heel around the time when Ric Flair left. Because like I said, when Ric Flair left, they were looking for a replacement for Ric Flair. So they turned Luger heel. Great American Bash 1991. He's in the match with Barry Windham. And Harley Race comes out, and Harley Race helps him. And he becomes, all throughout 91 and part of 92, he becomes Harley Race's, the wrestler that is managed by Harley Race's charge, if you will, before Vader. And Harley Race guides him to win the WCW championship, but he doesn't lose until Super Bowl II with Sting. So it's interesting when he comes back in 95, he's with Sting again. And Sting trusts him, but the other baby faces, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, don't. And then they're right not to trust him because at Halloween Havoc 95, I'll never forget it, not only does Jimmy Hart turn on Hulk Hogan, but Luger turns on him too. And Luger's kind of a tweener. Like, he'll cheat, but without Sting knowing. And him and Sting become tag team champions. And when the Road Warriors come back in the early part of 1996, January of 96, the Road Warriors come back to WCW. They face Sting and Luger. They feud with Sting and Luger at first. And Luger really doesn't really pick a side. He's between the Dungeon of Doom and Sting. He's between a babyface and a heel. He doesn't really pick a side until 96, uncensored. He takes the place of Brian Pillman because Brian Pillman was in the match. And Brian Pillman drops out of the match and Luger takes his place. And then Luger finally picks a side and he sides with, helps Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage in their efforts against the combined forces of the Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom at Uncensored 96. And from there, they have the NWO angle, which Luger was a part of. He was part of the WCW contingency to take on Scott Hall and Kevin Nash when they come over. And he's hugely over. And he's so over in 96. 96 going into 97. Because keep in mind, Sting is out of it. Nobody trusts Sting. And that was one of the biggest things about this relationship, was that it had its ups and downs, Sting and Luger. But at the same time, when Luger first came in and nobody trusted Luger, Sting trusted him. But when the time came for Luger to trust Sting, he didn't. He sided with Arn Anderson and Ric Flair. And he believed that Sting had, joined the NWO. So Sting felt betrayed, and that's when he became Crow Sting. So when they're in need of a babyface in 96, 97, and Luger becomes that guy. He has the fatal four-way match with him and the Giant. Him and the Giant become they were a really formidable team in 97, boy. They have a fatal four-way match with Harlem Heat. That's Spring Stampede 97, where Booker T made his famous gaffe, Hulk Hogan, we coming for you. And the reason why he said that was because the stipulation was the winner of this kind of fatal four-way-ish tag team match got a shot at Hogan for the championship. And Luger won this. And Luger in August of '97, it's the 100th episode of Nitro. I'll never forget it. It's the second time Hogan and Luger crossed paths. Because in the second episode of Nitro, babyface Hogan took on Luger. That was the second episode of Nitro. So Nitro was from the beginning in '95. Nitro was letting you know that it was in business. But this time in '97, 2 years later, in the same building where he was supposed to beat Yokozuna 4 years before that, Pontiac, Auburn Hills in Detroit. He was supposed to beat Yokozuna, but didn't beat Yokozuna, beat him only by a countout. Finally, he beats Hulk Hogan, and he does win the championship. He doesn't hold on to it all that long, like he loses it the next weekend at the Road Wild pay-per-view, but it gave fans a taste of what it was supposed to be like when Sting finally comes back and he beats Hulk Hogan. From there, once Sting comes back, Luger kind of flounders out there, man. And it's not until he joins the Wolfpack in '98, he gets Sting to join, that he finally develops a personality of his own. But when Hogan turned back, when Hogan joined the Wolfpack and the Wolfpack turned back heel, Luger stayed with the Wolfpack and he turned heel too. And that's when he developed a relationship with Miss Elizabeth. And the relationship with Miss Elizabeth was highly toxic, and unfortunately in 2003, resulted in the death of Miss Elizabeth. Luger was really screwed up, man. You know what I mean? Like, he had some really screwed up problems. They didn't take him back in WWE when WCW closed its doors. I don't really know why. Like, I always assumed it was because of the Elizabeth situation. And then he goes on the Indies. There's that video with a match. He's doing a pre-tape match with him and R-Truth, and he's like, and the shirt's too tight too, Billy. You know, he's really upset, like a real strange indie promo. And then, you know, he had his stroke, and he ended up in that chair, and he became a different guy. He became a Christian, along with Sting, along with the Road Warriors, along with Nikita Koloff, and other former wrestlers that embraced Christianity. Ted DiBiase being one of them. Also, and he just became a different guy, and he was just waiting for years and years to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and he's finally getting that chance. Congratulations to the total package. Also announced for the Hall of Fame this weekend, the natural disasters, typhoon and earthquake. I believe that Typhoon is still alive. I'm not sure. Yeah, he is. Fred Ottman, the Shockmaster. Shockmaster is going into the WWE Hall of Fame. Cody's uncle. You know the famous story. They were a tag team in the early '90s. Initially, Fred Ottman was a tugboat in 1990. This is one of the first shows I ever went to, and I fell asleep. It was a house show at Madison Square Garden between Hulk Hogan and Earthquake. They were doing it around the loop, because this was after. For those that don't know, from the Brother Love show, Earthquake attacks Hulk Hogan. He breaks Hogan's ribs. Hogan had to go do a movie. He had to shoot film Suburban Commando. At this time, this was like 90. Yeah, this was 90. And Earthquake was new in the WWE. He'd been teaming with Dino Bravo. The way they introduced Earthquake was really weird. He was introduced as a fan. And like, it was a way to challenge the Ultimate Warrior. He had to put Earthquake on his back and do push-ups. And then Earthquake sits down on him. It was with Jimmy Hart and they team Earthquake. He was the Canadian Earthquake. It was him and Dino Bravo as a tag team. But he was breaking out of the Dino Bravo mold, and he's he attacked Hulk Hogan, and they did this letter writing campaign where if you wrote into Hogan, uh, wrote prayers and your concerns, Hogan being in the hospital, he would come back at SummerSlam, and that eventually became the main event for SummerSlam in 1990. And but they did their loop, around the whole territory, the Northeastern Territory, which was normal for WWF wrestlers at that time. And my parents took me. And it's crazy that I became such a huge wrestling fan because that was one of my first times seeing it. That was before SummerSlam 91. That was before WrestleMania 10, before 20, before 29, before May 19th, 96, Curtain Call, and all the other times that I was at a wrestling event. This was my first one. And I fell asleep, guys, on Earthquake versus Hogan. you know? But by the time Earthquake joined the Natural Disasters, man, I liked him. He also came to WCW in late '94. He did the sumo match with Yokozuna on Raw. And after that, he was going to WCW Typhoon too. But when Typhoon came to WCW, he came in '93. Like the Natural Disasters was already broken up by then. And it was Ole Anderson's idea to create the Shockmaster, this big Ole Anderson and Dusty Rhodes. This guy, the Shockmaster, because it was War Games coming up, and it was Sting, Davey Boy Smith, and Dustin Rhodes. They needed a tag team partner to go against Harlem Heat, Sid, and Vader. So they're on Flair for the Gold, Ric Flair's talk show, and they introduced the Shockmaster, and everybody's looking back, and Ole Anderson's doing the voice. I am the Shockmaster, and he trips over himself. He falls on his ass, and you can hear British Bulldog going, I think he just fell on his arse, And like, it's one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of professional wrestling. And Cody Rhodes is alleged to say to his father, "Hey, that's Uncle Fred," because Dusty is married to, I think, Typhoon's sister. So, yeah. They just switched Shockmaster's gimmick to a construction worker after that. And I think he wrestled one more match against the Colossal Khans, these two other fat guys that Harley Race managed at Starrcade. And then, no, that was it. That was the end of him. He went back to WWE for a while. And then after that, I guess he just retired from wrestling. But Tugboat was supposed to be, you guys know the Sergeant Slaughter Iraqi storyline. We talked about it a lot, the reaction to it that was negative from the fan base in 1991 because people felt they were exploiting a real life war, and they were exploiting the conflict between the United States and Iraq at that time. And, well, Tugboat, Fred Ottman, was supposed to be the turncoat. He was supposed to be the Iraqi sympathizer, and they were going to call him Sheikh Tugboat. And I'm guessing they got this from Jerry Blackwell had done this in AWA because everybody had their resident Middle Eastern bad guy. And in AWA, it was Sheikh Adnan Al-Kaisi, a.k.a. General Adnan in WWE. And for Super Sunday 1982, in addition to 1983, In addition to the Hulk Hogan Nick Bockwinkel main event, the semi-main was Vern Gagne and Mad Dog Vachon taking on Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi and Sheik Jerry Blackwell. So a big fat white guy turning into an Arab Sheik, and maybe that's where they got it from. I don't know. But Sheikh Tugboat would have been terrible. Thank God they didn't go that route and they invited Sergeant Slaughter. It wasn't great, but it was better than what Sheikh Tugboat would have been. But yeah, the natural disasters were fucking huge, man. You know, I just remember the match they had at Royal Rumble '92 against the Road Warriors. That shit was cool, man. Anyway, congratulations to both of them. Also, Michelle McCool is going in, and of course Triple H. We talked about it. Him going in. I heard rumors about Demolition. I don't think they'll get Demolition this year because they're getting the natural disasters in there. So maybe next year for Axe and Smash. Who knows? But congratulations to Lex Luger. He really deserves it. And like David said, he's a true wrestling legend, especially for WCW. He was one of the top guys in WCW for their whole run, basically. Because Turner buys the company in '88, Luger stays with them, goes to WWE for a while, but he didn't do really anything in WWE. He didn't really make an impact in WWE in any sort of way. He was really mainly a WCW guy. And I hope Sting inducts him. I hope Sting doesn't. I know Sting retired and he's not in AEW anymore, but I hope if he has some kind of contract with Tony Khan lets him do it because there's nobody else fitting to induct Lex Luger other than his longtime friend / rival Sting. Peace.